"Grandma, don't eat that," my grandson shouted at the family dinner. I asked, "Why, please, just don't," he replied, his voice trembling. I switched my plate with my daughter-in-law's mother. 15 minutes later, she simply fainted, revealing an evil plot I never saw coming. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm Eleanor, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew my family. I thought the worst betrayal I'd face would be someone forgetting my birthday or missing Sunday dinner. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Literally. It was a Tuesday evening in October when I decided to host what I thought would be a pleasant family gathering. The autumn air had that crisp bite to it that made me want to cook something warm and comforting. I'd spent the entire afternoon preparing my famous pot roast, the same recipe I'd been making for 40 years. The house smelled like home garlic, rosemary, and that rich, deep aroma that only comes from slow-cooked beef. My son Michael arrived first with his wife of 3 years, Vanessa, and my precious grandson, Tommy. At 12 years old, Tommy was the light of my life, always full of energy and curiosity. But that evening, something was different about him. He seemed nervous, fidgety, keeping his eyes on his mother in a way that made my grandmother instincts prickle. Vanessa had been acting strange for weeks. I'd noticed it during our last few visits, the way she'd watch me when she thought I wasn't looking, how she'd steer conversations toward my health, my medications, my advancing age. Though she was only 34, beautiful in that sharp, calculated way some women perfect, with blonde hair that never seemed out of place and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Eleanor, you've outdone yourself again," she said, surveying the dining room table I'd set with my good china. "This looks absolutely wonderful." Her voice had that overly sweet quality that made my skin crawl. But I smiled back. "Thank you, dear. I know how much Michael loves pot roast." Michael hugged me, but even he seemed tense. My son had changed since marrying Vanessa. The easy laugh I remembered from his childhood had become forced, and he rarely visited alone anymore. "Tonight's a special night," he said, but his jaw was tight, and he avoided eye contact. "Where's your mother, Vanessa?" I asked, noticing we were one place setting short. "Oh, she'll be here any minute," Vanessa replied quickly. "She was just running a quick errand." I bustled around the kitchen, bringing out the side dishes, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh rolls. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. Vanessa's mother, Margaret, arrived just as I was setting the pot roast on the table. She was a frail woman in her early 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded me of my own mother. She'd always been pleasant enough, though we didn't know each other well. "Margaret, how lovely to see you," I called out, genuinely pleased. "I've set you a place right here next to Tommy." As we all took our seats, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Vanessa kept glancing at the kitchen, then at me, then at Michael. Tommy was practically vibrating in his chair, and Margaret seemed unusually quiet. "Eleanor," Vanessa said suddenly, her voice bright but strained, "I made sure to put your plate right there with the extra vegetables. I know how much you love them." I looked down at my plate. It did look delicious, thick slices of pot roast swimming in rich gravy, creamy mashed potatoes, perfectly seasoned green beans. But something about the way she emphasized it being my plate made me uncomfortable. "That's very thoughtful, dear," I said, picking up my fork. That's when Tommy exploded. "Grandma, don't eat that." The words burst out of him like he'd been holding them back with every ounce of strength in his small body. Everyone froze. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Tommy," Michael's voice was sharp with warning. But my grandson wasn't backing down. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he stood up from his chair. Please, Grandma, he pleaded. Please just put it down. Don't eat anything. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the slight hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Vanessa's face had gone completely white, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, panic. Honey, what's wrong? I asked Tommy gently, setting my fork down completely. Tommy looked at his mother, then at his father, then back at me. Tears were starting to form in his eyes. I, I can't, I just, please don't eat that. Tommy's been having some behavioral issues lately, Vanessa said quickly, her voice pitched higher than normal. Haven't you, sweetheart? Maybe you should go to your room. But I'd raised children. I knew the difference between a tantrum and genuine terror, and my grandson was terrified. Something cold settled in my stomach, without really knowing why. I stood up and looked at Margaret, who was sitting quietly with her own plate in front of her. Margaret, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Would you mind switching seats with me? I'd love to sit next to Tommy. Oh, that's not necessary, Vanessa started. I don't mind at all, Margaret said kindly, already standing. The switch happened quickly. I took Margaret's seat, and she took mine. With it came our plates I now had her serving, and she had what Vanessa had so carefully designated as mine. There, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Now I can keep an eye on this troublemaker. I ruffled Tommy's hair, and he leaned into me like he was seeking protection. We ate in relative quiet after that, though the tension never fully lifted. Vanessa barely touched her food. Michael kept checking his watch, and Tommy stayed pressed close to my side. Only Margaret seemed truly relaxed, chatting pleasantly about her garden as she enjoyed what should have been my dinner. 15 minutes later, Margaret's fork clattered to her plate. Oh, she said softly, pressing a hand to her forehead. I feel quite dizzy. I turned to look at her just as her eyes rolled back and she collapsed sideways in her chair. Unconscious, the chaos that followed happened in slow motion. Michael jumping up, Vanessa screaming, my own hands shaking as I called 911. But through it all, one thought kept echoing in my mind, that should have been me. As the paramedics worked on Margaret, loading her onto a stretcher, I caught Tommy's eye. He was crying now, great heaving sobs. But when our eyes met, I saw something there that chilled me to the bone relief. My 12-year-old grandson was relieved that his grandmother's friend was being taken away in an ambulance instead of me, which meant he knew exactly what had been in that food. And if Tommy knew, then someone had told him or he had discovered it himself. Someone in this room had tried to kill me tonight. Standing in my doorway, watching the ambulance pull away with Margaret inside, I realized that my perfect family dinner had just revealed the most horrifying truth of my 68 years. Someone I loved wanted me dead. Damn. Margaret survived, but barely. The doctors at St. Mary's Hospital told us she'd been poisoned with antifreeze ethylene glycol. They called it sweet-tasting, nearly odorless, and absolutely lethal if consumed in the right amount. She was in intensive care, and they weren't sure if there would be permanent kidney damage. I sat in that sterile waiting room, surrounded by my family, and felt like I was drowning. Everyone was playing their parts perfectly. Michael paced the halls, looking appropriately worried about his mother-in-law. Vanessa sat in the corner, dabbing at her eyes with tissues the picture of a distraught daughter. But I wasn't fooled anymore. How could this have happened? Vanessa kept saying. How could antifreeze get into the food? I just don't understand. If I hadn't seen Tommy's terror, if I hadn't witnessed the careful way she designated which plate was mine, I might have believed her too. Tommy hadn't said a word since we'd arrived at the hospital. He sat next to me, small and quiet, occasionally glancing up at his mother with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 12-year-old. After 3 hours, when the doctors assured us Margaret was stable, Michael suggested we all go home and get some rest. "There's nothing more we can do tonight," he said, and I noticed how quickly Vanessa agreed. "You're right," she said, standing immediately. "Tommy needs his sleep for school tomorrow." But as we walked toward the parking lot, Tommy tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma," he whispered, "can I stay with you tonight? Please." I saw the flash of anger cross Vanessa's face before she controlled it. "Sweetheart, you have school tomorrow," she said in that falsely sweet voice. "You need to sleep in your own bed." "I want to stay with Grandma," Tommy insisted, his voice stronger now. "Tommy," Michael started. "Let him stay," I said firmly. I could use the company after tonight's scare. The look Vanessa gave me could have frozen water. But she couldn't object without seeming unreasonable, so she forced a smile and agreed. Once we were alone in my house, the same house where, just hours earlier, someone had tried to murder me, Tommy finally broke down. He collapsed onto my living room couch and sobbed like his heart was breaking. I held him, rocking him the way I had when he was little, until the worst of it passed. "Grandma," he whispered against my shoulder, "I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have stopped her." "Stopped who, honey?" He pulled back and looked at me with eyes far too old for his face. "Mom. She's been planning this for months." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known deep down, but hearing it confirmed by my own grandson was devastating. "Tell me everything," I said quietly. What Tommy told me over the next hour destroyed every remaining illusion I had about my family. He'd overheard phone conversations Vanessa talking to someone about getting rid of the old bat and making it look natural. He'd seen her researching poisons on her computer when she thought he wasn't looking. He'd watched her practice putting something in food and stirring it until it dissolved completely. She told me if I ever said anything, she'd send me away. Tommy said, his voice breaking. "She said no one would believe me anyway because I'm just a kid. But when I saw her put that stuff in your plate tonight—" "How long has this been going on?" "Since the summer," he said. "Maybe longer. She started asking me weird questions about you, like, did you take any medications? Did you ever feel sick after eating at our house? Did you have chest pains or anything?" I felt sick. My own daughter-in-law had been using my grandson to gather information about my health, probably to figure out how to make my death look natural. Nato. "Tommy, is your father involved?" The boy's face crumpled. "I don't know. Maybe. He's been acting really weird lately. And he's been asking about your will a lot." "My will, of course. I owned this house outright, had a decent savings account, and some investments that had done well over the years. Not a fortune by most standards, but enough to be worth killing for, apparently." "There's something else, Grandma," Tommy said, his voice barely audible. "I think Mom tried to poison you before. Remember when you got really sick after that dinner party last month? And the time before that when you had to go to the emergency room?" I remembered. Both times I'd attributed it to food poisoning or a stomach bug. Both times it had been Vanessa insisting I eat certain dishes. "She's been practicing," I whispered, the full horror of it hitting me. "She's been testing doses." Tommy nodded miserably. "Tonight was supposed to be the real thing. I heard her on the phone yesterday. She told someone it would finally be over." I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. My daughter-in-law hadn't just decided to kill me on a whim. This was a carefully planned, methodically executed attempt at murder. She'd been slowly poisoning me for months, probably trying to find the right amount that would kill me without being immediately obvious. And she'd been using my grandson as an unwitting accomplice. forcing him to carry this terrible secret. Tommy, why didn't Margaret get as sick as I would have? Because you're smaller, he said simply. And because Mom probably put extra in your plate since she wanted to make sure this time. The calculation of it made my blood run cold. Vanessa had literally measured out my death. But there was something else bothering me. Honey, how did you know for sure that tonight was the night? Tommy's face flushed red. I, I listened at their bedroom door last night. Mom and Dad were talking. She said the old lady would finally be gone by Wednesday and they could start looking at retirement homes for Grandpa Joe. Retirement homes for my father. My father had passed away years ago. For Grandpa Joe. Not for Grandpa Joe to live in, Tommy said quickly. To put me in? She said once you were gone and they inherited everything, they wouldn't need me around anymore. That I was too much work and knew too much. The room seemed to spin around me. Not only had Vanessa planned to murder me, but she'd also planned to abandon my grandson afterward, her own son. That's when I knew I had to stop her. Tommy continued. I couldn't let her hurt you, and I couldn't let her send me away. You're the only one who really loves me, Grandma. I pulled him close again, my heart breaking for this brave little boy who'd been carrying such a terrible burden. But beneath the heartbreak, something else was growing, something cold and calculating. Vanessa thought she was smart. She thought she'd planned the perfect murder. She'd even planned to get rid of the only witness afterward. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd survived 68 years, raised 3 children, buried a husband, and built a comfortable life through sheer determination and careful planning. If Vanessa wanted to play games with my life and my grandson's future, she was about to learn that I was far from the helpless old woman she thought I was. But first, I needed proof, real proof that would stand up in court and ensure that Tommy would never have to go back to that house. Tommy, I said quietly, how would you like to help Grandma with a little project? He looked up at me, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time that night. What kind of project? I smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it was completely genuine, the kind that's going to save both of our lives. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes from having your back against the wall. Tommy was still asleep on my couch, curled under the old quilt I'd made when Michael was his age. Looking at him, so small and vulnerable, strengthened my resolve. This child had risked everything to save my life. Now it was my turn to save his. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd planned countless birthday parties, holiday dinners, and family gatherings. Today, I was planning something entirely different. When Michael called at 8:30, I was ready for him. Mom, how are you holding up? His voice sounded genuinely concerned, but I could hear something else underneath impatience, maybe even irritation. Oh, you know me, I said, making my voice sound shakier than usual. I'm just so shaken up by what happened to poor Margaret. I keep thinking it could have been any of us. Yeah, it's really scary, he agreed. Listen, Vanessa thinks maybe you shouldn't be cooking for a while. Until we figure out how this happened. Maybe we could bring you some meals. Or you could eat out more. How thoughtful of Vanessa to be concerned about my cooking. I almost laughed at the audacity. That's very sweet of her, I said. But I think I'll be fine. I'm going to have the kitchen thoroughly cleaned just to be safe. There was a pause. Mom, Vanessa also thinks, well, maybe this is a good time to talk about your living situation. This house is so big for just you. And after last night, there it was. Less than 12 hours after trying to kill me. They were already moving on to phase 2 of their plan. What do you mean, sweetheart? Just that maybe it's time to consider assisted living somewhere with meal service. You know, where you don't have to worry about cooking or maintaining this big house. I see. I kept my voice neutral. Well, that's certainly something to think about. Is Tommy still sleeping? Yeah, Vanessa says to let him rest. He can miss school today after the trauma of last night. How convenient. Keep Tommy home where they could work on him. Probably convince him that what he saw wasn't what he thought he saw. Actually, Michael, I was hoping Tommy could stay with me for a few more days. I could really use the company, Joel, and I think he needs some time to process what happened. Another pause. Longer this time. I don't think that's a good idea. Mom, Tommy needs routine, and Vanessa thinks isn't really relevant here, I said, letting a bit of steel creep into my voice. Tommy is my grandson, and after what we've been through, I think a few days with his grandmother would be good for him. Mom, Michael, I made my voice firm, unless there's some reason you don't want Tommy staying with me. The silence stretched out. I could practically hear him thinking, probably wondering if I suspected anything. Of course not, he finally said. It's just, Vanessa worries about you being alone with a child at your age. At my age, as if 68 made me incompetent, as if I hadn't raised 3 children successfully. I managed to raise you just fine, I said dryly. I think I can handle one 12-year-old for a few days. After I hung up, I found Tommy awake in the living room, looking lost and scared. Hey, sweetheart, I said, sitting beside him. How are you feeling? Scared, he admitted. What if Mom finds out I told you? What if she tries to hurt you again? I took his hands in mine. Tommy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother isn't going to hurt me again because we're not going to let her. But I need your help, and it might be scary sometimes. He straightened up, trying to look brave. What do you need me to do over the next hour? I explained my plan. It was risky, but it was the only way I could see to get the evidence we needed and keep us both safe. First, I said, we need to document everything, every conversation, every suspicious behavior, everything you remember from the past few months. I pulled out a notebook, and we spent the morning writing down dates, times, and details. Tommy's memory was remarkably good. He remembered specific phone conversations, times when Vanessa had acted strangely, and instances when I'd gotten sick after eating at their house. Second, I continued, we need to make them think their plan is working. What do you mean? I'm going to start acting sick, confused, like I'm getting worse. They'll think the poison is having delayed effects, and hopefully, they'll get careless. Tommy looked worried. But what if they try to poison you again? They won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. Not for a while. They'll want to see if the damage from last night is going to finish the job first. And besides, I'm not eating anything they give me anymore. That afternoon, when Michael and Vanessa came to pick up Tommy, I put on quite a performance. Oh, I'm so glad you're here, I said, letting my voice waver slightly. I've been feeling so strange today, dizzy, and I keep forgetting things. I saw Vanessa's eyes light up with interest, though she tried to hide it behind concern. Oh, Eleanor, maybe you should see a doctor, she said, but I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Maybe, I agreed. Although at my age, these things happen, don't they? My memory isn't what it used to be. Mom, are you sure you're okay? Michael asked. And for a moment, he sounded like my little boy again. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a bit rattled from last night. I suppose, when they tried to take Tommy, I played my trump card. Actually, I said, gripping Tommy's hand, I was hoping he could stay one more night. I keep having these episodes of confusion, and I'm afraid I might fall or something. Having him here makes me feel safer. It was brilliant, if I do say so myself. They couldn't object to Tommy staying to take care of his poor, deteriorating grandmother without looking heartless, And if they thought I was already showing signs of mental decline, they'd be less worried about me figuring out their plan. Of course, Vanessa said quickly. Tommy should definitely stay and look after you. After they left, Tommy looked at me with something approaching awe. Grandma, you're really good at this. Honey, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn a few things about people. Your mother thinks she's very clever, but she's also very predictable. That evening, Vanessa called to check on me. How are you feeling, Eleanor? She asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. Oh, not very well, I said, adding a slight tremor to my voice. I had another dizzy spell this afternoon, and my stomach has been quite upset. Tommy had to help me to the bathroom. That's terrible, she said, but I could hear the excitement she was trying to suppress. Maybe you should consider going to the emergency room. No, no, I said quickly. I hate hospitals. I'll be fine. These old bodies just take time to recover. You know. Of course, she agreed. Well, try to get some rest. And Eleanor, maybe you should think about what Michael said this morning about your living situation if you're having episodes like this. You might be right, I said with a heavy sigh. This house is awfully big for someone in my condition. After I hung up, I turned to Tommy, who'd been listening from the kitchen doorway. Did you hear that? I asked. He nodded. She sounded happy that you're sick. Exactly, which means she's going to get sloppy. People get careless when they think they're winning. Over the next 2 days, I perfected my act. I forgot conversations, seemed confused about simple things, and complained of ongoing stomach problems and dizziness. Each time Vanessa called, I sounded a little worse, a little more helpless, and each time I could hear the satisfaction in her voice growing. On the third day, she made her mistake. Eleanor, she said during her daily check-in call, I've been doing some research about your symptoms. I think you might have had a small stroke. Sometimes they can be so mild you don't even realize it's happening. A stroke. Of course. That would explain the confusion, the dizziness, everything. And if I'd had one small stroke, who would question it if I had a larger, fatal one? Do you really think so? I asked, making my voice sound frightened. I do, she said, her concern sounding almost genuine. I think you should see a doctor right away. In fact, Michael and I have been talking, and we think you should come stay with us for a while, just until you're feeling better. Stay with them where they could control what I ate, who I talked to, and when I died. That's very thoughtful, I said carefully, but I don't want to be a burden. You could never be a burden, she lied smoothly. We want to take care of you. That's what family does. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. They were moving faster than I'd expected. I'd bought us some time by making them think their first attempt was working, but now they wanted to finish the job. The problem was, I still didn't have enough evidence to prove anything. I had Tommy's testimony, but he was just a child. I had my suspicions and some circumstantial evidence, but nothing that would convince a jury. I needed to catch them in the act, which meant I was going to have to let them try to kill me again. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a cold, calm determination settle over me. They'd made one crucial mistake in their planning. They'd underestimated their target. I wasn't some helpless old woman waiting to die. I was a mother protecting her grandchild, and there was nothing more dangerous than that. Vanessa wanted to play games with life and death fine, but this time I was going to be the one writing the rules. I had 48 hours to prepare before Michael and Vanessa expected me to move into their house. 48 hours to set a trap that would expose them and protect Tommy forever. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Robert Chen. I'd known Robert for 15 years. He'd handled my husband's estate and had always been straight with me. Robert, I need to change my will immediately, I said when he answered. Eleanor, is everything all right? You sound tense. I'll explain when I see you. Can you fit me in today? An hour later, I sat in Robert's office with Tommy beside me. Robert raised an eyebrow when I walked in with my grandson, but he didn't ask questions until we were settled. What's this about, Eleanor? I told him everything. The poisoning attempt, Tommy's testimony, my suspicions about the previous times I'd gotten sick. Robert listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. This is serious, he said when I finished. Have you contacted the police? With what evidence, a 12-year-old's testimony and my suspicions, they'd think I was a paranoid old woman. Robert leaned back in his chair. What do you want to do? I want to change my will. Everything goes to Tommy, with you as trustee until he turns 25. Michael gets nothing, and I want you to hold on to the original. Don't tell anyone about the change. Eleanor, if you suspect they're trying to kill you for your inheritance, removing their motive might be the smartest thing to do. No, I said firmly. If I change the will and tell them, they'll just find another reason to get rid of me. They know too much now, and they've already shown they're willing to abandon Tommy. I need them to try again. You want them to try to kill you again? Robert looked horrified. I want them to try and fail. And I want it all documented so they can never hurt either of us again. Robert was quiet for a long moment. What do you need from me? I need you to know the truth in case something happens to me, and I need you to help me set up some insurance. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Robert would have investigators ready to move if something happened to me. He'd also prepare guardianship papers that would give me full custody of Tommy if anything happened to Michael and Vanessa. One more thing, I said as we prepared to leave. I need you to write a letter. If something happens to me, I want Tommy to know that none of this was his fault and that I was proud of him for trying to protect me. Robert's voice was gentle when he spoke. Eleanor, are you sure about this? There has to be another way. There is no other way, I said. They've already decided I have to die. The only question is whether I'm ready for them when they try. That evening, I put phase 2 of my plan into motion. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who lived across the street. Dorothy, I need a favor, I said. A big one. Dorothy Patterson was 72 sharp as a tack and had been watching the neighborhood like a hawk for the past 20 years. If anyone would help me catch killers, it was her. What do you need, honey? I explained the situation, and Dorothy's reaction was immediate and fierce. That little blonde witch, she snarled. I never liked her always too sweet, you know, and the way she looks at your house like she's already measuring it for new curtains. Dorothy, I need you to watch my house when they come to get me tomorrow. If anything seems wrong, call the police immediately. What do you mean, wrong? If they take me out of here on a stretcher, if I seem unconscious or drugged, if Tommy looks scared or upset, anything that doesn't look right. Eleanor, are you sure you want to go through with this? I don't have a choice. They're going to keep trying until they succeed, and then Tommy will be left with them. I can't let that happen. The next morning, I prepared my house like a stage set. I placed a small digital recorder in my purse and another one in the kitchen, hidden behind the flour canister. I arranged for Tommy to text Dorothy at specific times. If he missed a text, she'd know something was wrong. When Michael and Vanessa arrived to help me pack, I was ready. Mom, you look terrible, Michael said, and for once, he seemed genuinely worried. I did look terrible. I'd spent 20 minutes that morning making myself appear sicker pale makeup, trembling hands, the works. I've been having those dizzy spells all morning, I said weakly, and I'm so confused about everything. I can't even remember what I need to pack. Don't worry about it, Vanessa said quickly. We'll take care of everything. You just sit down and rest. I watched as she moved through my house, touching my things with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. She was already acting like she owned the place. Eleanor, she said, coming back into the living room, I made you some tea. It'll help settle your stomach. She handed me a cup of my own tea, brewed in my own kitchen, and I knew without a doubt that it was poisoned. That's so thoughtful, I said, accepting the cup with shaking hands. This was it, the moment of truth. I lifted the cup to my lips, letting the liquid touch my mouth but not swallowing. Then I pretended to sip it while actually letting most of it spill back into the cup. This tastes different, I said, frowning at the cup. Different how? Vanessa asked, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Bitter, I said, almost metallic. That's probably just because you're not feeling well, she said quickly. Everything tastes different when you're sick. I took another fake sip, then set the cup down on the side table. I think I need to lie down for a minute, I said, standing up slowly and swaying slightly. Mom, are you okay? Michael jumped up to steady me. Just dizzy, I murmured, leaning heavily on him. What happened next was like watching a play unfold, exactly as I'd written it. I pretended to collapse on the couch, my breathing becoming shallow and irregular. Tommy, who knew what was happening, started crying and calling my name. Michael began to panic, shouting for someone to call 911, but Vanessa was calm, too calm. Don't call an ambulance yet, she said. Let's see if she comes around on her own. Sometimes these episodes pass. Are you crazy? Michael shouted. She's barely breathing. David, calm down, Vanessa said firmly. Getting hysterical won't help anyone. Through my barely opened eyes, I watched her check her watch. She was timing it, waiting to see how long it would take for whatever she'd given me to kill me. Please, Mom, call 911. Tommy begged, playing his part perfectly. In a minute, sweetie, Vanessa said, her voice still eerily calm. Let's just wait a little longer. That's when I knew I had her. Any normal person would have called for help immediately. Any innocent person wouldn't have suggested waiting when someone was dying in front of them. Vanessa's behavior was so clearly that of someone who expected me to die that even the most skeptical jury would see it. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 minutes. I heard Michael say, "That's it. I'm calling 911. No, wait, Vanessa said sharply. I think she's already gone. Already gone. She wanted me to be dead. I waited until I heard the sirens before I regained consciousness. What? What happened? I whispered weakly, opening my eyes and looking around in confusion. The relief on Michael's face was genuine. The disappointment on Vanessa's was equally real. You collapsed, Mom, Michael said, holding my hand. The paramedics are here. As the EMTs checked my vital signs and asked me questions, I gave them the performance of my life, confused, weak, unable to remember clearly what had happened. I mentioned the bitter taste of the tea, and I saw one of the paramedics make a note. We should take her in for observation, the lead paramedic said. At her age, a collapse like this could indicate several serious conditions. Is that really necessary? Vanessa asked. She seems to be feeling better. The paramedic gave her a look that clearly said he thought she was an idiot. Ma'am, your mother-in-law just lost consciousness for several minutes. That's not something we take lightly. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I made sure to grab my purse with the recorder inside. I also made eye contact with Tommy, giving him the slightest nod to let him know I was okay. At the hospital, I continued my act while the doctors ran tests. Everything came back normal, of course, because I hadn't actually consumed any poison. but the important thing was that it was all being documented. When the nurse asked me about what I'd eaten or drunk before the episode, I made sure to mention the tea that Vanessa had made for me. It tasted strange, I said weakly. Bitter, metallic. I've never tasted anything like it. The nurse made a note, and I knew that if anything happened to me in the future, there would be a record of this conversation. Michael and Vanessa visited that evening with Tommy in tow. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Michael asked. "Confused," I said honestly. "The doctors can't figure out what caused the episode. They're running more tests." "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Vanessa said, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. Her plan had failed again, and now there were medical records documenting my symptoms. "The doctor did ask me about the tea," I said casually, watching Vanessa's reaction. "He wanted to know exactly what was in it." Vanessa's face went pale. "The tea. It was just regular tea, Earl Grey." "I think that's what I told him," I said, but he seemed very interested in the metallic taste I mentioned. He said they might want to test it. Test it? Michael looked confused. Test tea? When someone has an unexplained collapse, they have to consider all possibilities, I said, including the possibility that something they consumed might have caused it. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's hands were shaking, and she kept glancing toward the door like she wanted to run. "Well," she said finally, her voice pitched too high, "I threw the cup away. I was just cleaning up while we waited for the ambulance." Of course she had. But what she didn't know was that I'd only pretended to drink the tea. The cup, with most of its poisoned contents still inside, was now sitting in my dishwasher at home, waiting to be tested, and Dorothy Patterson had watched her throw something into my garbage can when she thought no one was looking. As visiting hours ended and my family prepared to leave, I caught Tommy's hand. "I'll be home soon, sweetheart," I said softly. "Promise," he whispered. "I promise. And when I come home, everything is going to be different." Vanessa overheard and smiled that fake sweet smile of hers. "Of course it will be," she said. "We're going to take such good care of you. Eleanor, you'll never have to worry about anything again." Looking into her eyes, I saw my own death reflected back at me. She wasn't giving up. If anything, she was more determined than ever. But that was exactly what I was counting on. Because tomorrow, when I was released from the hospital, I was going to give her one final chance to show her true colors. And this time, I'd make sure the whole world was watching. The hospital released me the next afternoon with instructions to follow up with my regular doctor and a prescription for mild anxiety medication that I had no intention of taking. As Michael wheeled me out to the car, I played my part perfectly fragile, confused, dependent. "I still feel so strange," I said weakly as Vanessa helped me into the passenger seat. "Like I'm not quite myself." "That's completely normal after what you've been through," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You just need rest and people to take care of you." The drive to their house felt like a funeral procession. I stared out the window at the familiar streets, wondering if I was seeing them for the last time. But every time doubt crept in, I thought about Tommy sitting quietly in the back seat, and my resolve strengthened. Their house was a modern two-story in one of the newer developments, all clean lines and expensive finishes, but somehow cold. Michael carried my small suitcase upstairs, while Vanessa showed me to what she called my room. "We've set up the guest room on the first floor, so you won't have to worry about stairs," she said, opening the door to a room that felt more like a cell than a bedroom, one small window. Furniture positioned so the bed couldn't be seen from the hallway, and most importantly, far from Tommy's room upstairs. "This is lovely," I said, settling into the chair by the window. So thoughtful of you. I want you to feel completely comfortable, Vanessa said, and safe. That's the most important thing. Safe. The irony wasn't lost on me. That first evening, they treated me like spun glass. Michael hovered anxiously, asking if I needed anything every few minutes. Tommy stayed close, playing the concerned grandson while secretly checking on me with his eyes. And Vanessa watched me like a hawk studying its prey. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance. Vanessa had prepared what she called light, easy-to-digest foods: soup, crackers, herbal tea. I ate sparingly, claiming my stomach was still upset from the hospital stay. You should try to eat more, Vanessa urged, ladling another spoonful of soup into my bowl. You need to keep your strength up. I know, dear, but everything tastes so strange lately, I said, stirring the soup around. Ever since that episode, I saw her jaw tighten slightly. My continued survival was clearly frustrating her. After dinner, as Michael helped me back to my room, I overheard Vanessa on the phone in the kitchen. No, she's not getting better, she was saying in a low voice. If anything, she's getting worse, more confused, weaker. I don't think it's going to be much longer. I don't think it's going to be much longer. She was reporting to someone about my condition, like I was a business transaction. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, I heard them talking in their room upstairs. The heating vents carried sound throughout the house, and their bedroom was directly above mine. How long is this going to take? Michael's voice was strained. Not much longer, Vanessa replied. She's already showing signs of organ damage. The confusion, the weakness, it's all progressing exactly as it should. I can't take much more of this. Every time I look at her, I feel sick. You feel sick? Vanessa's voice turned sharp. Michael, we've come too far to back out now. Do you want to spend the rest of your life working jobs you hate while she sits on a fortune she can't even appreciate anymore? No, but nothing. This is temporary. A few more days, maybe a week, and then we can move on with our lives. Real lives with real money. What about Tommy? There was a pause, and when Vanessa spoke again, her voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Tommy will adapt. Children are resilient, and once we have the inheritance settled, we can look into boarding schools, good ones, where he'll get a proper education and learn not to ask so many questions. Boarding school, they were planning to ship my grandson away as soon as I was dead, and they had their hands on my money. The next morning, Vanessa brought me breakfast in bed, another thoughtful gesture that allowed her to control exactly what I consumed. I made your favorite, she said brightly, setting down a tray with scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. And I added some honey to the juice. You need the energy. The juice looked normal, but I wasn't taking any chances. I waited until she left, then carefully poured most of it into the plant by the window and refilled the glass with water from the bathroom tap. Around noon, when I was supposed to be napping, I heard Vanessa talking on the phone again. This time, I managed to get close enough to the door to hear more clearly. It has to be today, she was saying. Michael's getting cold feet, and the old bat is starting to ask too many questions about her medications. I think she suspects something. A pause. No, I can't wait any longer. Today, when she has her afternoon tea, I'll make it strong enough that there won't be any question about the outcome. My blood ran cold. This was it, her final attempt. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I texted Dorothy Patterson from my hidden phone, letting her know that today was the day. I made sure the recorder in my purse was working and positioned where it would pick up conversations. Most importantly, I prepared Tommy for what was about to happen. When he came to check on me after school, I whispered quickly while Vanessa was busy in the kitchen. Today's the day, I said softly. Remember what we talked about. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it looks, don't try to stop her. Let it play out. His face went pale, but he nodded bravely. At 4:00, right on schedule, Vanessa appeared with a cup of tea. I thought you might like some chamomile, she said, her voice warm and caring. It helps with nerves. She'd even added a small plate of cookies, the perfect picture of a devoted daughter-in-law caring for her elderly mother-in-law. That's so sweet of you, I said, accepting the cup with trembling hands. I could smell it immediately, a chemical odor underneath the chamomile, sharper and more accurate than the antifreeze she'd used before. Whatever she'd put in this tea, it was meant to finish the job quickly. Drink up, she said, settling into the chair across from me. It's good for you. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I lifted the cup to my lips, made sure she saw me take what looked like a large sip, then set it down with a satisfied sigh. Delicious, I said. You make the best tea. Vanessa smiled, but her eyes never left my face. She was watching for the first signs that the poison was taking effect. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. I complimented her on the cookies, asked about her day, played the role of the unsuspecting victim perfectly, all while the poisoned tea sat cooling on the side table, most of its contents still undrunk. Eleanor, Vanessa said suddenly, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. Of course, dear. What is it? It's about your will. Here it was. She couldn't wait for me to die naturally. She needed to make sure everything was in order first. My will. I blinked in confusion as if the topic had never occurred to me. Michael and I have been talking, and we think you should update it, to make sure everything is clear and legal. We wouldn't want there to be any complications for Tommy. What kind of complications? Well, if something happens to you, which of course we all hope it won't for many years, but if it does, we want to make sure Tommy is taken care of, that he has guardians who love him and a secure financial future. She was so smooth, so practiced. If I hadn't known what she was really saying, I might have been touched by her concern. I suppose that makes sense, I said slowly. What did you have in mind? Nothing major, she said quickly. Just updating the beneficiaries to reflect the current family situation, making sure Michael and I are listed as Tommy's guardians and that the inheritance is structured in a way that makes sense. Structured how? Well, you know how these legal things work, trusts and whatnot. Michael and I could manage everything for Tommy until he's older, much older. Much older, like never. I should probably talk to my lawyer about this, I said. Oh, that's not necessary, Vanessa said quickly. Michael knows a lawyer who specializes in estate planning, someone much more current than that old man you've been using. Of course they did. Someone who would make sure the will was written exactly as they wanted it. I don't know, I said hesitantly. Robert has been handling my affairs for years. I trust him. Vanessa's voice took on a harder edge. I think you're not understanding how serious this situation is. You've been having episodes, memory problems, confusion. What if something happens to you and your affairs aren't in order? What if Tommy ends up in foster care because there are legal complications? She was threatening me, threatening to let my grandson end up in the system if I didn't sign over my estate to them. I wouldn't want that, I said weakly. Of course you wouldn't. That's why we need to take care of this right away, today, if possible. Today, she wanted me to sign a new will today and then die tonight from the poison tea, quick, efficient, and legally bulletproof. I'm feeling a bit tired, I said, putting a hand to my forehead. Could we talk about this tomorrow? Vanessa stood up abruptly, her patience finally cracking. There might not be a tomorrow. The words hung in the air between us like a confession. What do you mean? I asked, my voice small and frightened. She caught herself, forcing her expression back into one of concern. I just mean that at your age, with your recent health problems, it's important not to put off important decisions. But it was too late. I'd heard the truth in her voice, seen the mask slip for just a moment. Vanessa, I said quietly, is there something you're not telling me? She sat back down, leaning forward with an expression of deep sympathy. Eleanor, the doctors at the hospital, they told Michael and me that your episodes are likely to get worse, much worse. They think you might have had a series of small strokes and that larger ones are almost inevitable. They told you this. Why didn't they tell me? They thought it would be too upsetting for you in your current state. But Michael and I felt you had a right to know so you could make informed decisions about your future. It was a masterful lie. She was creating a medical emergency that didn't exist to pressure me into signing away my estate. And she was using my supposed mental incompetence to explain why I wouldn't remember conversations that had never happened. How long do I have? I whispered. They don't know for sure, she said gently. But they think you should put your affairs in order as soon as possible. I sat back in my chair, letting the full weight of her deception wash over me. She wasn't just trying to kill me for my money. She was torturing me first, making me believe I was dying naturally so I'd cooperate in my own destruction. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course, Vanessa said, standing up again. But don't think too long, for Tommy's sake. After she left, I sat staring at the teacup on the table. In it, I could see the reflection of everything I'd lost: my son's love, my sense of family, my trust in the people closest to me. But I could also see something else: my own strength, still intact after 68 years of life's challenges. Vanessa thought she'd broken me down, made me helpless and dependent. She thought I was just a confused old woman who would sign whatever papers she put in front of me. She was about to learn how wrong she was, because tomorrow morning I was going to give her exactly what she wanted: a confrontation that would expose her for what she really was. And this time, I was going to make sure there were witnesses. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Vanessa moving around the kitchen, probably wondering why I wasn't dead yet. The poisoned tea sat on my nightstand exactly where I'd left it, a testament to her failed plan. Today was the day I stopped running and started fighting back. At 8 Huzzaries sharp, there was a knock at the front door. Vanessa answered it, and I heard her surprised voice greeting someone. Mr. Chen, what are you doing here? I'm here to see my client. Robert's voice was firm and professional. Mrs. Parker called me yesterday and asked me to come by this morning. Of course, I'd done no such thing, but Robert was playing his part perfectly. We'd arranged this as part of our contingency plan. She's not feeling well, Vanessa said, and I could hear the tension in her voice. Perhaps you could come back another time. I'm afraid this can't wait, Robert replied. It's regarding her will? The magic words. I heard quick footsteps, and then Vanessa was in my room, her face flushed with excitement and anxiety. Eleanor, your lawyer is here, she said. He says you called him about your will. Did I? I blinked in confusion. I don't remember calling anyone. It's all right, she said quickly. You've been having some memory issues, but since he's here, maybe we should take care of that business we discussed yesterday. Perfect. She was so eager to get her hands on my estate that she was walking right into my trap. I suppose that would be all right, I said weakly. Could you help me to the living room? As we made our way slowly down the hall, I saw Robert in the living room, but he wasn't alone. Detective Sarah Martinez from the local police department sat beside him, dressed in plain clothes, but with an unmistakable air of authority. Who's this? Vanessa asked sharply. Detective Martinez, Robert said smoothly. She specializes in elder fraud cases. Given Mrs. Parker's recent health issues and the sensitive nature of estate planning, I thought it would be prudent to have a witness present. Vanessa's face went pale, but she couldn't object without looking suspicious. Of course, she said tightly. We want everything to be completely legal. As I settled into my chair, Detective Martinez smiled warmly at me. Mrs. Parker, I understand you've been having some health concerns lately. Yes, I said, glancing nervously at Vanessa. Having episodes, confusion, memory problems. My daughter-in-law thinks I might have had some small strokes. I'm sorry to hear that, the detective said. Have you seen a neurologist about these symptoms? The doctors at the hospital ran some tests, I replied, but Vanessa says they told her things they didn't tell me. Detective Martinez raised an eyebrow and looked at Vanessa. Is that right, Mrs. Parker? They didn't want to upset her, Vanessa said quickly. Given her fragile state, I see. And you felt it was appropriate to share medical information that doctors had decided to withhold from their patient. The question hung in the air like a sword. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. I thought she had a right to know. Of course, Detective Martinez said smoothly. Now, Mr. Chin tells me there's some urgency about updating Mrs. Parker's will. Yes, Vanessa said, gaining confidence again. We want to make sure everything is in order, especially with her health being so uncertain. That's very thoughtful of you, the detective said. And what changes did you have in mind? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I watched as Vanessa launched into her carefully prepared speech about guardianship for Tommy, trust funds, and the importance of having younger people manage the estate. She was so focused on selling her story that she didn't notice Detective Martinez taking notes or the small recording device sitting openly on the coffee table. So, you believe Mrs. Parker is mentally incompetent to manage her own affairs? Detective Martinez asked when Vanessa finished. Not incompetent, Vanessa backtracked quickly. Just confused sometimes, forgetful, but competent enough to make major changes to her will. Well, yes, with guidance. Whose guidance? Yours? Vanessa was starting to look trapped. Michael and I just want what's best for the family. Of course you do, Detective Martinez said. Mrs. Parker, do you remember asking your daughter-in-law to make you tea yesterday afternoon? My heart raced, but I kept my expression confused. Tea? Yes, I think so. Chamomile tea? And how did it taste? Strange, I said slowly. Bitter. I didn't finish it. Detective Martinez nodded and looked at Vanessa. I understand you threw away the teacup after your mother-in-law's episode. I was just cleaning up, Vanessa said, but her voice was starting to crack. Fortunately, your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, noticed you putting something in the garbage. She was concerned about Mrs. Parker and decided to preserve the evidence. The color drained from Vanessa's face completely. Evidence, she whispered. The teacup and its remaining contents have been tested. Mrs. Parker, Detective Martinez said calmly. We found traces of strychnine. That's a very serious poison. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as Vanessa's world collapsed around her, her carefully constructed plans crumbling like a house of cards. That's impossible, she stammered. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Detective Martinez said, standing up. We've also tested the dishwater from Mrs. Parker's house after the first incident. Same poison, different concentration. It appears you've been attempting to murder your mother-in-law for several months. No, Vanessa jumped to her feet. This is ridiculous. I would never. We also have testimony from a witness, the detective continued relentlessly. Someone who overheard you discussing your plans. Vanessa spun around to look at me, her face twisted with rage and desperation. You, she hissed. You knew. You've been playing games with me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I dropped my act completely. I sat up straight, looked her directly in the eye, and smiled. Yes, I knew, I said clearly. I've known since the night you tried to poison me the first time, the night my grandson saved my life by warning me. Tommy, she breathed, understanding flooding her face. That little traitor, that brave little boy, I corrected her. He's been carrying the weight of your evil for months, terrified that you'd kill me and then abandon him. He's 12 years old, 12, and you made him an accessory to attempted murder. I gave him everything, she screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. I gave him a home, food, clothes, everything he needed. You gave him nightmares, I said, my voice hard as steel. You gave him the impossible choice between saving my life and staying loyal to his mother. You used him as a spy, gathering information about my health so you could plan my murder more effectively. Detective Martinez stepped forward. Vanessa Parker, you're under arrest for attempted murder. As the handcuffs clicked around Vanessa's wrists, she turned to me one last time, her beautiful face ugly with hatred. You think you've won, she snarled. Michael will never forgive you. Tommy will never get over what you've done to his mother. You'll die alone, you bitter old woman. I looked at her calmly. Vanessa, I've been alone for 3 years ever since you married my son and started poisoning him against me. The difference is, now I'm alone by choice, not because someone is trying to kill me. As they led her away, Michael came running down the stairs. He'd been upstairs the whole time, probably hiding from what he knew was about to happen. Mom, what's going on? He asked, though the guilt written all over his face told me he knew exactly what was going on. Your wife has been arrested for trying to murder me. I said simply. That's impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Michael, Detective Martinez said, we're going to need to talk to you as well. We have evidence suggesting you were aware of your wife's plans. I watched my son's face crumble as he realized there was no way out. He'd made his choice when he decided my money was worth more than my life, and now he was going to face the consequences. Mom, he whispered, I never wanted this to happen. Yes, you did, I said sadly. Maybe not at first, but somewhere along the way, you decided I was worth more dead than alive. You let her turn you into someone I don't recognize. I'm still your son. No, I said firmly. My son would have protected me. My son would have called the police the moment he suspected his wife was trying to harm me. You're not my son anymore, Michael. You're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. The next few hours were a blur of police statements, evidence collection, and legal procedures. But through it all, one thing remained constant. Tommy stayed by my side, holding my hand, finally free to love his grandmother without fear. When the dust settled, when the police had finished taking photographs of the poisoned teacup and collecting evidence from Michael and Vanessa's house, when the reporters had been sent away and the neighbors had stopped staring, it was just me and Tommy in my living room. Grandma, he said quietly, are you really okay? I'm better than okay, sweetheart, I said, pulling him close. I'm free. What's going to happen to me now? I held him tighter. You're going to live with me. I've already talked to the lawyers about getting legal guardianship. You're going to go to school, play with your friends, and never have to worry about grown-ups who hurt people ever again. What about Mom and Dad? I was quiet for a moment, choosing my words carefully. Your parents made some very bad choices. Tommy, they're going to have to face the consequences of those choices. But that's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix it. Do you think they ever really loved me? The question broke my heart. I think they loved the idea of you, I said honestly. But real love doesn't threaten to send someone away when they become inconvenient. Real love doesn't ask a child to keep dangerous secrets. How do you know the difference? I smiled and kissed the top of his head. Real love protects you even when it's hard, even when it means making sacrifices, even when it means standing up to people who should love you but don't. 6 months later, I sat in the same living room, watching Tommy do his homework at the coffee table where Detective Martinez had placed her recording device. The house felt different now, lighter, safer, filled with the kind of laughter that comes from genuine happiness rather than polite pretense. Vanessa had been sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder. Michael got 5 years for conspiracy, though I suspected he'd be out in 3 with good behavior. They'd both tried to contact Tommy through letters, but I'd made the decision to intercept them until he was old enough to decide for himself whether he wanted a relationship with them. The inheritance they'd been so desperate to get their hands on, I'd restructured it completely. The house would go to Tommy when he turned 25, along with enough money to ensure he'd never have to depend on anyone else's goodwill for survival. The rest would go to charities that supported children in foster care kids who, like Tommy, had been failed by the adults who were supposed to protect them. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the sound of my grandson laughing at something on television, the way he ran to hug me when he came home from school, the fact that he slept peacefully at night without nightmares about his grandmother being murdered. I was 69 years old now, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. I'd learned that family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. It's about the people who would risk everything to protect you, even when they're just 12 years old and scared. I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, strong enough to outwit people who thought my age made me helpless, strong enough to risk my own life to save my grandson's future, strong enough to walk away from toxic relationships, even when they wore the mask of family. As I watched Tommy working on his math homework, his tongue poking out in concentration the same way Michael's used to when he was that age, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. The people who should have loved me had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they'd only made me realize how strong I really was, and sometimes that's the greatest gift of all. The trial of Vanessa Parker versus the state became something of a local sensation. People are always fascinated by stories of family betrayal, especially when they involve attempted murder and elderly victims. I tried to shield Tommy from the worst of it, but it was impossible to escape completely. The evidence against Vanessa was overwhelming. The poisoned teacup, the recorded conversations, Tommy's testimony given via closed-circuit television to spare him the trauma of facing his mother in court, and most damning of all, Vanessa's own words when she thought I was dying. All of it painted a picture of calculated, cold-blooded attempted murder. Michael's role was more complex. His lawyer argued that he had been manipulated by his wife, that he'd been aware of her intentions but had been too weak to stop her. It was a pathetic defense, but it earned him a lighter sentence. I attended every day of the trial, sitting straight-backed in the front row, my eyes never leaving Vanessa's face. I wanted her to see me alive, strong, undefeated. I wanted her to know that she had failed completely. On the day of the sentencing, the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I hadn't planned to, but looking at Vanessa sitting there in her prison jumpsuit, trying to look remorseful, I changed my mind. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. I've lived 69 years on this earth. I've buried a husband, raised 3 children, and built a life I'm proud of. In all that time, I never imagined that the person who would try to take my life would be someone I welcomed into my family, someone I tried to love. I paused, looking directly at Vanessa. The poison that almost killed me wasn't just in my food. It was in the lies Vanessa told my son, turning him against me. It was in the fear she planted in my grandson, forcing a child to carry the burden of knowing his mother was a would-be murderer. It was in the slow destruction of the family I had built and loved. I saw tears in Vanessa's eyes, but I wasn't moved. She was crying for herself, not for what she had done. I don't hate Vanessa Parker, I continued. Hate would give her power over me that she doesn't deserve. But I do want justice not just for me, but for my grandson, whose childhood was stolen the moment his mother decided that money was more important than human life. I looked at the judge. Whatever sentence you impose cannot restore what was taken from us, but it can ensure that Vanessa Parker never has the opportunity to harm another family the way she harmed mine. The courtroom was silent when I finished. Even Vanessa's lawyer seemed at a loss for words. The judge sentenced her to the maximum allowable under the plea agreement, 15 years, with the possibility of parole after 10. As the bailiff led her away, Vanessa looked back at me one last time. There was no rage in her eyes now, no hatred, just a kind of empty defeat. In that moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Rebuilding our lives wasn't easy. Tommy had lost both his parents in the most traumatic way possible, and despite his brave face, I knew he was struggling. We started seeing a family therapist, Dr. Reynolds, who specialized in children who had experienced trauma. Tommy's exhibiting classic signs of complex trauma. Dr. Reynolds told me during one of our private sessions, he's torn between grief for the parents he's lost and relief that the threat is gone. Add in guilt for his role in exposing their plans, and you have a perfect emotional storm. What can I do to help him? I asked. Keep doing what you're doing, she said. Provide stability, consistency, and unconditional love. Let him know it's okay to have complicated feelings about his parents. And most importantly, make sure he knows that none of this was his fault. I took her advice to heart every day. I made sure Tommy knew he was loved, that he was safe, that he had nothing to feel guilty about. We established new routines, new traditions. We planted a garden together, took cooking classes, went on weekend trips to places he'd never been. Slowly, the shadows in his eyes began to recede. There were still hard days, of course, days when he'd ask difficult questions I wasn't sure how to answer. Grandma, he asked one evening as we were washing dishes together, do you think Mom and Dad would have really sent me away if their plan had worked? I considered lying, telling him what he wanted to hear, but I'd promised him honesty, and I couldn't break that promise now. I think they might have, I said gently, not because there was anything wrong with you, but because they were making choices based on greed, not love. He nodded, absorbing this. Sometimes I miss them, he admitted. Is that weird to miss people who did such bad things? Not weird at all, I assured him. They were your parents. It's natural to miss them, to wish things had been different. Do you miss Dad? That was harder. I missed the son I'd raised, the boy who'd once brought me dandelions and called them flowers. I missed the man I'd thought he was. But the person who had stood by while his wife tried to kill me, that man I didn't miss at all. I miss who he used to be, I said finally. But people change, Tommy. Sometimes they change into someone we don't recognize anymore. And when that happens, it's okay to let them go. He seemed to understand. In his way, children often grasp emotional truths that adults overcomplicate. As the months passed, we settled into our new normal. I enrolled in a senior art class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never found the time for. Tommy joined the school science club and made new friends who knew nothing about his family's infamous history. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. The hardest moment came when Michael's first letter arrived from prison. It was addressed to Tommy, and I had to decide whether to give it to him or not. Dr. Reynolds had advised me to let Tommy have some agency in this decision. Tommy, I said, showing him the envelope, but not giving it to him yet. Your father has written to you. You don't have to read it if you don't want to. And if you do want to read it, we can do it together, or you can read it privately. It's entirely up to you. He stared at the envelope for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, I think I want to read it, but not yet. Maybe we can put it in a drawer and I'll read it when I'm ready. Of course, I said, relieved that he wasn't rejecting the letter outright, but also wasn't rushing into what could be an emotionally dangerous situation. Whenever you're ready, or never, it's your choice. The letter went into the drawer of his bedside table. Every now and then, I'd catch him looking at it, but he never opened it, not yet, and that was okay. 1 year after Vanessa's arrest, we decided to have a small celebration, not of the terrible events, but of our survival, our resilience. I invited Dorothy Patterson, who had become a dear friend, and Robert Chin and his wife. Detective Martinez stopped by briefly, bringing Tommy a model rocket kit that made his eyes light up. How are you really doing, Eleanor? Robert asked me quietly as we watched Tommy showing his rocket to Dorothy in the backyard. Better than I could have imagined, I said honestly. There are still moments, of course, times when I wake up in the night and can't believe my own son was willing to let me die. But then I look at Tommy, and I know that something good came out of all that darkness. Robert nodded. You know, in all my years practicing law, I've never met anyone as brave as you were that day. Most people would have gone to the police at the first suspicion and risk having them not believe me, risk having Tommy sent back to that house while they investigated. No, I had to be certain. I had to have proof no one could question. Well, you certainly got that, he chuckled. The look on Vanessa's face when Martinez mentioned the poison test, I'll never forget it. Neither will I admitted, though sometimes I wish I could. Later that evening, after our guests had gone and Tommy was getting ready for bed, he came into the living room with a serious expression on his face. Grandma, I've been thinking about something. What is it, sweetheart? I want to change my last name. I don't want to be a Parker anymore. I hadn't expected this. That's a big decision. Tommy, what name would you want to use instead? Yours, he said simply. Before you got married, Grandpa's name, my maiden name, Mills, Eleanor Mills. It had been so long since I'd used it that it almost didn't feel like mine anymore. But hearing Tommy say it, Tommy Mills, it sounded right somehow. We can look into that, I promised. But there's no rush. Take some time to be sure it's what you want. I am sure, he said with that quiet determination that reminded me so much of myself. I want a fresh start, and I want people to know that I'm your family, not theirs. I hugged him then, this remarkable child who had seen the worst of human nature and somehow emerged with his own goodness intact. You are my family, I whispered. No matter what name you use. Life continued to surprise us in unexpected ways. About 18 months after the trial, I received a letter from Michael. Unlike his letters to Tommy, which I set aside, I opened this one immediately. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I am sorry, more sorry than words can express. Prison gives a man a lot of time to think, And I've been thinking about the kind of person I became with Vanessa, the kind of son, the kind of father. I was weak. I let greed and Vanessa's manipulation cloud my judgment until I couldn't see right from wrong anymore. That's not an excuse. There is no excuse for what I did or what I failed to do. How is Tommy, I understand, if you can't or won't tell me? I just hope he's okay. I hope he knows that none of this was his fault. I've enclosed a signed statement giving you full legal guardianship of Tommy. My lawyer says this will make the permanent custody process easier for you. It's the least I can do. I won't write again unless you want me to. Just know that I am sorry, and that I'm trying to become someone better than the man who betrayed you. Michael. I read the letter 3 times, searching for manipulation, for hidden agendas. But all I found was what seemed to be genuine remorse. Too little, too late, but perhaps better than nothing. I showed the letter to Dr. Reynolds at our next session, seeking her professional opinion. It seems sincere, she said cautiously. People do change, especially after experiencing serious consequences for their actions. But the real question is whether having Michael in your lives again, even just through letters, would be healthy for you and Tommy. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to forgive him, for Tommy's sake if nothing else. But another part can't forget what he did, what he was willing to do. You don't have to decide right now, she reminded me. Or ever, for that matter. And forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. You can forgive someone and still choose not to have them in your life. I didn't respond to Michael's letter. I filed it away with the custody paperwork, which I gave to Robert to handle. Maybe someday I'd find it in my heart to forge some kind of relationship with my son again. But not yet, and maybe not ever. And that was okay too. Tommy turned 14, then 15. He grew taller. His voice deepened. He joined the high school swim team. He made friends, got his first crush, experienced all the normal teenage milestones and some not so normal ones, like testifying at his mother's unsuccessful parole hearing. I turned 70, then 71. I took up yoga, joined a book club, even went on a few dates with a kind widower I met at my art class. Life moved forward, as it always does, and one day I realized that I had gone an entire week without thinking about Vanessa or the poison or the fear. A whole week of just living, without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. Grandma, Tommy said that evening as we were having dinner, you seem different lately, happier. Do I? I smiled. I suppose I am. I think I've finally let go of the past. I'm glad, he said simply. Then, after a pause, I opened Dad's letter last night, the one he wrote 2 years ago. I tried to keep my expression neutral. And how do you feel about that? He shrugged, pushing his peas around his plate. Confused, mostly. He said he's sorry, that he loves me, that he hopes I can forgive him someday, but I don't know if I can, or if I want to. You don't have to decide now, I told him, echoing Dr. Reynolds' words to me. Or ever. I know, he nodded, but I think I might want to write back to him. Not to forgive him, just to let him know I'm okay, that we're okay. Would that be all right? Of course it would, I assured him. That's entirely your decision. He smiled then, that bright, genuine smile that never failed to warm my heart. Thanks, Grandma, for everything. In that moment, looking at my grandson strong, resilient, kind, despite everything he'd been through, I knew with absolute certainty that we had won. Not just the legal battle, not just the struggle to rebuild our lives, but the fight to preserve our capacity for joy, for trust, for love. Vanessa and Michael had tried to destroy us for money. They had calculated the value of my life and found it worth less than my bank account. They had treated Tommy as an inconvenient witness to be disposed of when he was no longer useful. But they had failed, completely and utterly failed. Because here we were, 3 years later, eating dinner and talking about the future. Here we were, planning a summer vacation to the Grand Canyon. Here we were, alive and whole and free. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Looking back on that terrible night when Tommy first warned me not to eat the poisoned food, I'm struck by how close we came to a very different ending. If Tommy hadn't been brave enough to speak up, if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I had dismissed my grandson's warning as childish dramatics, I wouldn't be here now. Watching him grow into the remarkable young man he's becoming, life is fragile that way. It can turn on a single moment, a single decision, a single act of courage. I think about Margaret sometimes, Vanessa's mother who unknowingly ate the poison meant for me. She recovered eventually, though she suffered some permanent kidney damage. She moved to Arizona to live with her sister, far away from the scandal her daughter had created. We exchange Christmas cards each year, a strange connection forged by a terrible, almost tragedy. Dorothy Patterson still lives across the street, still watches the neighborhood like a hawk, though now she does it with a renewed sense of purpose. You never know what's happening behind closed doors, she likes to say. Sometimes people need someone to be paying attention. Robert Chin retired last year, though he still handles my legal affairs. You're my most interesting client, he told me at his retirement party. How could I possibly give that up? Detective Martinez was promoted to sergeant. She stops by occasionally, usually with some small gift for Tommy, a book she thought he'd enjoy, a keychain from a recent trip. Just checking in on my favorite witnesses, she always says. As for me, I've discovered something surprising in my 8th decade of life, a profound sense of freedom. Freedom from fear, from the need to please others, from the obligation to maintain toxic relationships simply because they're labeled as family. I've learned that family is a choice we make every day, a choice to love, to protect, to stand by someone even when it's difficult. Tommy and I chose each other in the midst of betrayal and danger. We continue to choose each other every day, and that choice has made all the difference. So if there's a moral to my story, perhaps it's this: age doesn't determine strength. Love doesn't always come from the places we expect. And sometimes, the most important person in your corner is a 12-year-old boy with enough courage to say 5 simple words. Grandma, don't eat that. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Dendyun.